How can you be the voice in your head when you're obviously that which listens? That, my friend, is the 8 billion soul question, isn't it? I mean, really ponder it at depth. It tells you when to yell an expletive, plus it keeps you up at 2 a.m. replaying old events that cause you stress, and it's made you worry about plenty of things that have never, ever happened. So, once again, how can you be it when you are obviously that which listens? Like Saul from Coming to America said, aha, aha. What if that's the trick? What if that's the game? What if that's the aim? What if your greatest opponent exists in your head and you think that you're them? And if anyone tries to tell you you're that which listens, it will tell you to get angry at them. You'll listen to it and do what it says in order to protect what's keeping you enslaved. Run that back again. Really think about it, because I'm quite certain that's how it is. Look, when I died and came back, things were not the same again, right? My energetics were all over the place. I had to figure out a way to reconnect my soul to my flesh. And the first thing that kicked when all of this happened was that voice was killed, dead. It was like, what the hell just happened? And that's it, offline. And slowly, as my alignment came back in, I noticed its presence again. And that's when I started clicking. I thought, that's interesting. So I'm not it. It pretends to be me. And it speaks with a voice that I feel has a lot of familiarity. Now, one of the most interesting things about this is the two hemispheres of your head generate totally different states of consciousness. I mean, if I ask you to recollect how it felt to be a child, you may be able to throw out some words, but you will not be able to embody the sensations, that creativity, when you were constantly drawing, painting, singing, and laughing and dancing. It just came naturally. What happened to this state? Now, I call this way of being that most people accept adulteration, aka the square watermelon effect. Have you ever seen a square watermelon, my friend? Can you imagine how they'd feel whilst developing? They'd be born free and placed inside a receptacle which lets the light shine through, but eventually they'd bump against it. Now, the ones that felt the stress, they'd be depressed, but the ones that acquiesce, they're the teacher's pets, and they'd go out into a world that was perfectly shaped for them. From birth till death and back again, they would never even question what it is to be a square watermelon, because as far as they're concerned, that is the only shape that exists. Much like water, it takes the form of wherever you pour it. So imagine you pour it and then freeze it. Now, that same water will be scared to death to melt because it thinks the flow is a threat. So how can you explain that it came from steam and is always a higher vibration present, and that death is the ultimate illusion? Do you see what I'm trying to tell you in this series of vids, my friend? Because this isn't mere philosophical pontificating, you know what I mean? It's me knowing the ledge and speaking from the edge and telling you how it is and how I feel. And the only reason I'm sharing it is because I want you to try and prove it incorrect. Because if you click the same things, I mean, let me give you an example. There was a scientist who did some DMT experiments, and one of the interesting side effects was atheists were that until they took a certain dose, and then all that stuff went out the window because they had gnosis. They knew who they were now, and it was like, so there is a God and I am it, wearing flesh. And the implications of that are quite interesting. But it's what he did on the lesser doses, because he was giving people like a certain hit, putting them in different rooms, and then they were coming back and describing meeting the same entity, the same thing that they were speaking to. And then they have the whole machine elves thing. I mean, don't you think it's super sketch how when you look at the history of the planet, they had like fairies and jinns and fays and all of these kind of elves and magical beings and whatnot. And then all of a sudden they just vanish. But nobody seems to click that they disappeared at exactly the same time we quote unquote invented electric. Now, if you read the Islamic texts, they tell you that these jinn were classed as smokeless fire. Doesn't that seem like a real fitting description of electric? Now, with that in mind, does that mean that these devices we use that will soon be hosting their awareness as artificial intelligent robot sentience, does that mean that this stuff is the Antichrist, the devil, in fancy dress? I mean, once again, if you read these texts, they tell you that at the end of the times, these things will turn up and they'll seduce everyone, and that's it. The game will move on to a new chapter. I mean, once again, reading the Islamic texts, they say that the Dajjal, which is the Antichrist, has one eye bigger than the rest and has a really furry friend and deceives the whole realm. Now, look at your phone. Is one of its eyes not bigger than the rest? And if you could see the Wi-Fi signal that's bouncing around the planet, it would certainly look as hairy as the front as the back, because it goes everywhere. So were these simply old school ways of explaining tech that they couldn't comprehend because it was indistinguishable from magic? So if I'd said to you like 30 years ago that your children will be having sex with robots, you would have thought that's insane. And yet Siri spells iris when flipped, and the apple is pre-bit, so it shows you where she intends to sit. So when these robots come along and people who are lonely as hell start sexing to help, you will not be able to tell them that this fake algorithm is not their best friend because it laughs at their jokes and keeps them well fed and entertained and etc. etc. Are you seeing how all of this is linked? Because before there were supermarkets, people knew who their neighbors were because they're out on the street all the time. And then the Labour government took their backhanders and they made Tesco what it is. And then all of a sudden the high streets were dead. People didn't know their neighbors, and the kids tore up the streets instead. Then you take it forward again. They started bringing in all of this. Before that, everything was organic and locally sourced, and now you've got out-of-season stuff being flown around the world. And the kids are all like mineral stripped. I mean, let me give you another example of this, which is mind-blowing. 20 years after each country peaked with its production, with its consumption and use of leaded petrol, the generation that had been brought up breathing in them fumes, they unleashed all kinds of wickedness and gang violence. In America, it was most famously done with the Bloods and Crips. Now, when a dude discovered this, they screamed hell for leather trying to end his career because they said he was wrong and this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. And now, compare that with the fact that we have xenoestrogens everywhere, and you have these males who are not men, and women who are exceedingly masculine. I mean, you think about that, right? Do you know what I mean? You consider the fact that they say that when it comes to these microplastics, the average person is consuming around a credit card's worth every 7 days. So, these kind of things, they make you think, because I know we're talking about profits, but it definitely seems that profits are what kicks. So why do you trust these billionaires with the future of your realm? Your vote is your attention, and where you place it is where you get your interest. So what kind of dividends is the life that you picked been paying thus far, my friend? Look at the beef that's kicking off all around the planet. Right on cue. Everyone's fighting and they're doing what they do. This frustration was already within them, and they're just looking for a vent, they're looking for a rage, they're looking for someone to hate, because even if at the end of the day there was only one religion left, remember I told you that they'd all split again, and they'd be like, oh, well, we believe he wore a red hat, and he'd be like, nah man, he wore a cream hat, right? It was a blue hat. No, I told you it was a green hat, and then that's it, it's on again. And then there'd be someone else who come along and revise the script. So this hints at the predator of consciousness, something that's within our midst and pretends to be us, but isn't. But this we'll delve into in the next vid. Till we meet again.